So I'll take it.
Exactly. Hey everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Greg, and I'm joined as always by a couple of mates, Jackson and Geordie. How are you boys?
Yeah, good, mate.
Great, thanks, Greg.
For a while, but that's all good. And we've got a very special guest on, Stan Efferding. Stan the Rhino Efferding. Stan, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Cool. So you're missing the UFC for us, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, I told you saved me $60. It's a good deal. I'll watch it for free on Instagram after we talk.
You've got a horse in the race too with the UFC, haven't you, Johnny?
Yeah, eventually he's moved his way up from 205 from light heavyweight up to heavyweight, and so we're just trying to pack some more mass on him and make sure he's comfortable at that weight. So yeah, I've been down in Albuquerque. I live in Las Vegas. The UFC fight is here in Las Vegas. It's been a bit of a zoo around here, but I travel to Albuquerque. I'm down there about 8 or 10 days, and I come home for 3 or 4 days and kind of go back and forth. And we anticipate that he won't fight until the first quarter of next year. So this will be probably an 8-month camp that we'll be working with him down there.
Wow.
Nice. That's a big prep. Yeah. How was that for you? Like going back and forward, do you enjoy it or?
Yeah, I'm used to traveling. I've been in 10 countries in all 50 states. I've done over 200 seminars in the last 3 years. And so I'm pretty used to it. This gig is it's only 90 minutes. So it's a real short flight, direct flight for me. And of course, working with John has just been extraordinary. So it's an adventure. I'm excited. I've actually kind of pushed off a lot of my other responsibilities and just focusing on John.
What's keeping you busy these days, Stan? Because we know you way back in the early 2000s, and you seem to have gone from strength to strength. You've had the cooler product, the vertical diet. Is there any sign of slowing down?
No, things just keep happening. I worked with a lot of great athletes over the last number of years. Hafthor Bjornsson, obviously, and Brian Shaw, and some great bodybuilders, and a few CrossFit national champions, and some NFL football players. I've been really busy, and of course the seminar tours. And then when COVID hit, all the traveling kind of shut down. Except we did take a summer tour. I rented an RV, and we went to 60 cities in 60 days and hit all 48 continental U.S. states and Washington, D.C. over a 60-day period. Drove over 16,000 miles, hitting a different city every night, and toured the entire United States, the continental U.S. And that was a big event, big tour. We had over 4,000 people attend nationwide, and wow. that was probably my last big trip that I went on. And since then, mostly working on the meal prep company. We provide vertical meals nationwide throughout the U.S., and that's prospered very well. We actually grew during COVID, of course, because people didn't want to go to grocery stores. And then the ebooks, we've just released a new series of ebooks. The Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook has evolved from the 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 over the years as I've added to it and expanded upon it and just updated the information. And that's been internationally successful. The book, the actual hard copy, Victory Belt Publishing is doing pre-sales on Amazon right now, and that'll be released in August at Barnes and Noble bookstores throughout the country. And we've just done some more ebooks. I have a strength ebook now, Strong, Stronger, Strongest, a speed ebook. I used to coach track athletes at the University of Oregon back in the early 90s. I've kind of been involved in sports performance, even though I competed in bodybuilding and powerlifting. Behind the scenes, I've always worked with athletes of a lot of sports, and track has been a real favorite of mine because the University of Oregon is known as Tracktown, USA. That's where the Olympic trials are held almost every year. And I used to work with those guys back in the early and mid 90s, along with the football team. And so finally published a book called Fast, Faster, Fastest. And that you see a lot of the overspeed training that we're doing with John Jones, and behind the scenes, a host of other things just to get him faster, systemically faster. And he's striking better, kicking better, jumping higher, mostly as a result of a lot of the speed work that we're doing, not even the strength stuff. Of course, there's a foundation of that still, but we're more interested in his sports performance. So his broad jumps improved, and obviously his speed and all of that. So we released that book, and then building a career in the fitness industry. I hope this hasn't turned into a Stan Efferding advertisement for my books, but you asked me what I was up to, and
yeah,
these are
we love it. We love it. Yeah,
I've been staying really busy, and the other book is how to build a career in the fitness industry, because I've been a personal trainer since college, since 1986. I was working in gyms, and I studied exercise science at U of O, and then became a high school soccer coach. Worked at gyms after college, owned a gym, trained trainers. All my life, this is what I've done. And it's always been hard to make a living at it, actual personal training itself. And it really wasn't until the advent of social media and kind of some of my good fortune and popularity with media that I was able to make a living doing a lot of the stuff I'm doing. But I think a lot of people still struggle doing just personal training. And they shouldn't, because there's so many customers out there. 70% of our country is overweight and obese, and the other 30% still want to improve their energy and sleep and, performance, etc. So we released a book that shows people how to be successful personal training and make a career out of it, be able to buy a home, put your kids through college, not just a side job, something that you have been passionate about but can't afford to live on. And there's some real basic fundamental principles, the things that I've utilized to be successful in my business. Those people who are familiar with me know I've built 5 multi-million-dollar companies in the last 15 years. And one of them has been in the fitness industry, as well as telecommunications and real estate and a host of other different ventures that I've pursued. But the foundation is the same foundation, being a great athlete, bodybuilder, powerlifter, great business person. And we incorporated all that into this book and released it recently. And on the horizon, we're still working on a vertical kids. That's my passion, is working with young athletes, and that's next on the list. So as you can see, I'm keeping busy, I should say. I'm 53 now, so I'm not competing, but I'm staying very, very active in the fitness industry at the very least.
Stan, you're in good shape. So I mean, you've got quite a portfolio of business. How do you balance that and still be out? What does a training week look for you at the moment in terms of maintaining your condition?
Yeah, I've always said it's twice as hard to gain, half as hard to maintain. And, every now and then I try and push myself, but I'm not really focused on competing anymore. And so I don't have to add a bunch of weight or get a lot stronger or bigger. And so, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I probably have to train about an hour, 4 days a week to be able to sustain what I've earned over the years in a reasonable level. I still weigh north of 240. I try and stay below 10% body fat, and I'm still strong enough, big enough. I'm in my 50s now, so I'm willing to make some concessions here and there. But at the same time, a lot of my clients are in their 40s and 50s, and they want to look better and be healthier. And you guys know that I've gotten blood tests almost on a monthly basis for at least 12, probably closer to 14 years now. And so I've been following my health very closely, even when I was purposely trying to kill myself powerlifting. I was pretty careful behind the scenes, to make sure that I had some longevity in the sport. And I set my world records when I was 45. And now at 53, I'm still maintain, I think, exceptional health and fitness as well. So I'm still able to do the kinds of things I've been passionate about. So I think people know me to be, and I've admitted to be, a bit OCD. I'm a bit of a micromanager. I have, lists, checklists, and I have a pretty rigid schedule that I try and maintain so that, I'm very careful with time management. And that's one of the things that I try and help my clients with as well, is not just information, but execution on how, I always say compliance is the science. It's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing altogether to be able to actually do it, and to make sure that it's, just achievable. The goals aren't, you don't set goals or create a schedule that you can't comply with long term, and make it into a lifestyle that still allows you to have your priorities, but maintain your fitness level. And I do a whole host of things like meal prep, things like, shorten my workouts, potentially doing, supersetting antagonistic body parts so I can still get all my volume in during the week. I'm just really organized, I think, is the main takeaway from all of this, is And that's the way I'm able to manage so much. And that's not to say there aren't some things that get away from me from time to time, but I try and focus on my priorities pretty hard. And then, I've got 2 kids now, 7 and 9, and I still like to, we just did a staycation this weekend here in Vegas, or this week. And I took the kids to Mandalay Bay to the wave pool, and I took them to the shark reef, and then we went over to Luxor and did the bodies exhibit, which is just extraordinary. That's the anatomy tour, where they take you through and show you all the cadavers in there, and that they've
we've had that over here. We've had that over here
Oh.
too. Basically, they thinly sliced portions of the bodies here. They've been cast in wax.
Fascinating. Yeah. I actually was fortunate when I was studying exercise science in college, and this was in the late 80s. They had cadavers, and I worked in a cadaver lab for nearly a year. And so I had to me, it's always been a passion of mine, an interest in physiology and, and fitness in general. So it was just exciting for me. I've been to it 3 times now, but this is the first time my kids had the opportunity to see it. And it's just awesome. So did I veer away from the question very far?
No.
Not too bad. No, it's good.
Like one of those perfect guests that you could just, lay an egg and just go for gold.
Yeah. I have to say though, I think Vegas would be the easiest place in the world to do a staycation. There is just so much stuff to do.
Oh yeah. And we're 10 minutes from the strip. And so you wake up in the morning and there's all those billion-dollar hotels and events and restaurants. And I will say this though, the kids got hungry, and we were at Luxor. That's the pyramid, the big pyramid hotel.
Yeah.
And so we went over to one of the little food courts, and they had a Johnny Rockets there. They just served cheeseburgers and shakes. And so I took the kids up and I said, I'd like to get 2 cheeseburgers and 2 vanilla shakes. Exposing myself as a terrible parent, of course. And I thought the lady said $15, but she said 50.
Oh,
Wow.
I was in shock. Yeah, $50 for the kids to get 2 cheeseburgers. And I always think, it's an interesting story, and I think this is a good segue for it. But because I'm writing the book Vertical Kids, it's about nutrition and training for kids, so parents can navigate that. And one of the most interesting seminars I attended was by Dr. Jose Antonio. He's president of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And he was speaking, it was year before last, at the National Strength and Conditioning Association's annual conference, which was in Washington, D.C. And he had a seminar there where he was presenting about children's nutrition, or at least that's how they titled it. The seminar room was packed, and these are huge rooms. They seat hundreds of people. And it was standing room only in the back, all up and down the walls. There had to be 600 people in this 300-seat room. And everybody was sitting there with their notepad out and their pen ready to go. And they wanted to hear about nutrition for kids. All of us are interested in that who have children. We preoccupy ourselves with their health. And so he gets up there and I think he apologized, saying that the seminar was probably mistitled because he was going to do a brief discussion about children's nutrition, but most of the seminar was about his protein overfeeding studies that he conducts down in Florida at his lab. And so he said, here's my nutrition for kids. He goes, get them 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight and forget about the rest.
Wow.
That was it.
That was it.
And we were all dumbfounded. We're all sitting there with our pens and pencils out.
Did you write it down though?
I could actually remember that one. It's probably the only thing I remembered from the whole week at those seminars. But it was fascinating when you think about that, us being in the industry and we see how sometimes things are overcomplicated. And we realize that calories are king and proteins, the primary macro of concern. Once you get too far beyond that, sufficient amount of sleep and a little bit of exercise, there's a lot of wiggle room that probably is much, much less important. And so, I made the mention that I took my kids to Johnny Rockets. I don't let them get French fries or chicken nuggets because they're deep fried in those vats of oil. But if I get them a double cheeseburger, I'm looking at the protein content and I'm actually, in a pinch, I'm reasonably satisfied with that choice if the alternatives are worse. be it pizza or fries or although the vanilla shake was probably a vacation thing, because I don't usually let them have the shakes or the sodas either. It's always water. But that's kind of my story on kids. The book is very comprehensive, kind of to help parents be able to not just understand what's important for kids' nutrition, but again, how to effectively implement that with kids, how to make it easier, so that you can actually accomplish the goal. And that's the hardest part, is just keeping them compliant.
I don't know about Stan, I don't know about the US, but over here in New Zealand, even as recently as several weeks ago, actually, my kids at the local college, they're 11 and coming up 15, but they were just talking about the state of their local tuck shop. And my wife's very much into concepts like the vertical diet and so forth and natural eating. And she was mentioning, well, the kids were mentioning to her the lack of choice available to the kids at the local cafeteria where they can buy their lunches. And the options are packets of chips and all sorts of real nasty food. But of course, they love it. But we're in 2021 now, and there's been so much education out there and a lot of thought, but yet we're still offering these sorts of things to our kids in schools. Is it similar in the US? Do you think some of the information is just not getting through?
It's not the information, it's the cost. Those foods are half the cost of real whole foods. And that really is what it comes down to, is expense. And they'll justify it any which way they can. Which president was it that said that, maybe it was Reagan, that said that ketchup was a vegetable? But I mean, this has been a downhill slide. We send our kids to school with their own lunch. We use the little thermos and with the lid on it, so I can make them a hot meal and they can take it to school. But not everybody has that opportunity, maybe in terms of time or resources, cost associated. So it's terrible. But one lunch at school doesn't dictate a kid's total nutrition program. It's a shame, but I think that we have a great opportunity to send them away with a good breakfast and to bring them home to a good dinner and keep them active. And I don't want to stress parents out with things like get organic and it's just sometimes you try to do too much and then you feel like a big failure. And the benefit of some of those things is, as I mentioned earlier, probably really small and inconsequential if you can manage the big rocks.
Yeah. Have you, with your own kids, Stan, have you got them eating vegetables? And if so, what is the secret?
No, not a lot of vegetables.
No, yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I don't think vegetables are the priority. I do think protein from a variety of.
My wife
I do think it's protein, and I do think that the micronutrients are more bioavailable and greater density in an assortment of animal proteins, whole egg, some yogurt or milk, some red meat, some fish. If I can get them an assortment of those foods every day, I more than cover the micronutrients. And then I go to fruits after that. We'll get them oranges and bananas and apples. It's kind of meats and sweets is really where I'm at. I'm not going to try and force feed them something that they don't enjoy. That I really, other than fiber, I don't think that there's much benefit or much need, unless they enjoy them, to force kids to eat those things, because you can get them, obviously if you stayed away from the highly palatable, ultra processed, low nutrient dense foods and substitute the proteins, and those proteins come from, as mentioned, a variety of different micronutrient dense animal sources, then I'm perfectly happy, and the kids thrive on those kinds of meals. I've been doing this since I worked with athletes in college back in the late 80s, football players and the like, and I've always focused on protein first and food first. A lot of athletes, even today, as well as back then, were always running down to GNC to try and figure out which supplement they should start with. And I'm like, man, it's not even icing. It's like the cherry on the cake. Yeah. Let's focus on the cake. And the cake is, let's eat enough calories, enough protein, And then I think thirdly on that list would be meal frequency for athletes, just so that they get an adequate bolus of protein, probably 3+ times a day. That's consistent with what the ISSN recommends. And again, those things are less important. I'll tell you an inside secret with my good buddy, John Jones, and that now that I've been working with him for a few months, John likes to eat a variety of foods. He doesn't like being stuck on a real stringent diet. And so I came down and I, of course, introduced him to the vertical diet, which I think is very diverse. When you compare it to the typical, bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini diet.
Chicken, broccoli, rice 6 times
a
day.
Chicken, broccoli, and rice. My diet has a lot more options and opportunities than that. But at the same time, he enjoys good tasting food. And so we tried to get in, obviously, adequate calories so he can maintain a small surplus because he's training hard and he's trying to gain mass. And then, of course, at least a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So he's north of 250 grams of protein a day. But he likes tasty food. So I was actually at one point when I would see him go out and get his favorite foods from fast food restaurants. And I just noticed that they weren't meeting the macro requirement that was necessary. They were a little low in protein and a little high in fat, which is less than optimal for an athlete. And so I actually got online and I Googled the menus, the nutrition facts for all of the fast food places near him that he liked to frequent. And I found the menu items that provided the right macro count that I wanted him to get, which was about a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio is what I preferred. And then to get adequate protein, 50 to 60 grams per meal. And so I sent him screenshots of the actual food items he could order at all of the fast food places that he liked to frequent, which seems like a huge concession for, Mr. Vertical Diet over here, who's so disciplined and I'm weighing and measuring, but in the big scheme of things, that's perfectly reasonable and adequate to fuel an athlete if you're focused on calories first and then protein. And after that, in terms of working with an athlete, I think we know that when dieting, where you put your fat and carb ratios really don't matter is when you control for calories and protein. It's personal preference and compliance. But for athletes, you like to keep, particularly athletes in a calorie surplus, particularly those athletes, you like to keep a little lower fat and a little higher carb because fats could be more easily stored as fat and carbs could be more easily used to fuel those anaerobic workouts and stored as glycogen. So that was my preference, and we're getting pretty darn close to the mark, considering that John likes to enjoy what he likes to enjoy and have the resources to get whatever he wants whenever he wants. And so, but he's been doing well, and he's been making incredible progress. So we're happy with it.
Nice.
It's cool. I lose count of the amount of times people are like, oh, you go to the gym heaps. You must be so healthy. Do you eat heaps of vegetables and stuff? I don't. Is that a big thing for you? Like, you don't really see a huge place for vegetables in a diet for the most part?
I would say that the most important part of that is going to be fiber.
Yeah.
And that would be particularly important for people who had, say, high estrogen, high blood sugars, high LDL cholesterol. Fiber would be of particular benefit for those folks. It's also very satiating for folks that are trying to lose weight. So I start with a high lean protein diet, and then I'm moving on to some high satiety foods like boiled potatoes, oranges, and those provide a decent amount of prebiotics and fiber and keep my clients satiated. And then I'll throw a salad at them if I need to, but at the end of the day, to keep them from binging on more of those high calorie, low satiety foods, the highly processed foods. So I do have strategies in place to where those things are of benefit for general health. Although I will say this, 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of the diet. We've seen that with the McDonald's diet, the Twinkie diet, the ice cream diet, the 7-Eleven diet. All of those people, when they lost weight, lowered their blood pressure, improved their cholesterol, lowered their blood sugars, and even to the point where, pre-diabetics could lower their HA1C. So that's the primary goal. And if vegetables are preferable to them and it helps them comply through satiety means, then that is certainly something that I'd want to encourage them to do. But in the absence of that, I'm shooting for, the sleep or the weight loss first.
Yeah.
So
get leaner, sleep better, and then everything gets better straight off the bat.
Everything gets better. You'd be shocked how many people, are running around looking for quick solutions. Some B complex vitamin because they're out of energy, but they're sleeping 4.5 hours a night.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But certainly there's coffee chasing, for breakfast, lunch, and whatever, just to keep them awake during the day. And they want to complain to me that they've got some sort of micronutrient deficiency or some sort of hormonal problem, when the fact of the matter is they're sleeping, 4.5, 5 hours a night because they're up surfing Instagram until 1 a.m. or watching TV and messing with their circadian rhythms. And then, they're up bright and early. And that's probably, obviously, you guys have heard me talk about it ad nauseum. It's so, it's almost annoying to me at this point when folks come to me with this whole list of problems that they think they have, and they're sleeping 5 hours a night. It's just maddening.
Yeah. It's one of those things, and everyone wants that quick fix, not the,
100%.
They want to take, I can take 3 of those pills rather than sleep an extra 3 hours a night or do the meal prep.
Oh, 100%. And that includes things like hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who owns a dozen of those clinics here throughout the Southwest here, California, Arizona, Texas, and Las Vegas area. And he says that I asked him one time, because I'm entrepreneurial, I'm always interested in the business model. I said, what's that business like, HRT? And he said, it's terrible. He said the turnover rate, an average client lasts about 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, why is that? And he says, well, they come in and they get their testosterone shot, right? And at the same time, they're all gung-ho, so they join the gym. They make some adjustments to their diet. They sleep a little bit more. But that only lasts about 30 days.
Yeah.
And the testosterone helps them a little and improves their libido. They get a little stronger. They have a little more energy. And how much of that is from the improved sleep and diet and exercise? Obviously a lot. Then they go back to their old habits. And after 30 days of their honeymoon wears off, they go back to eating like shit, sleeping like shit, and not exercising. And then they complain that the testosterone stopped working. So they quit coming in for their shots or, for the doctor's therapy, and they go, and that's not to laugh at those folks. We see that within 3 years, somewhere north of 90% of people gain the weight back that they've lost.
Wow.
We just tend to, there was a movie one time called What the Bleep Do We Know, where they said people tend to do what they've always done. And it's just a matter of going back to old habits. That's why a lot of what I try and do with my clients and in the book is try and provide people simple solutions that are what I call simple, sensible, and sustainable, things that can become a lifestyle. I attach those 10-minute walks to a meal because the best way to create habits is to attach them to an existing behavior and to make them sustainable. Nobody wants to, get dressed, get in the car, drive to the gym. Well, we do, but the vast majority of people don't. There's too many barriers to entry to go to the gym and do 30 minutes on a treadmill, which is monotonous and just maddening to begin with. It's not sustainable. It's something that people will do as a means to an end because they think that it's something that they're supposed to do. And now we know that exercise is not one of the key contributors to weight loss. Diet maintenance is. And so folks, they just abandoned that in a very short order. So I never prescribe a treadmill, 30 minutes of treadmill to a weight loss client. I never. It's ineffective. It's unenjoyable. It's unsustainable. And so I don't. I love the 10-minute walks. You can do them anywhere, anytime. They're a little bite size. It's a great habit to form. So I do those, and I mostly focus on diet compliance with high satiety foods, meal prep, just like I talked earlier about putting food in the thermos, or this is what the bikini industry does really well. They always carry around their Tupperwares full of food. That's the reason they lose weight so successfully. Not because they're eating egg whites and broccoli and tilapia. I trained Nadia Wyatt for the Miss Olympia. She took third in the Miss Olympia 2 years in a row. And she ate steak and whole eggs and fruit and potatoes every single day. But she prepped her meals. It was exactly the right calorie count and macros that she was trying to hit. But every single day she had prepped them, and she worked 10 hours a day. She didn't just train and eat and sleep. She had to go to a regular job, and she always had her meals prepped. And so she was able to stay compliant. But the meal prep itself, not necessarily what's in the containers, so long as it's a caloric deficit. So it just doesn't make any sense to me that folks should suffer through such a diet that's so deficient. We've all seen it. These women end up with biotin deficiencies. Their skin, hair, nails gets all dry. They end up with their thyroid slows from iodine deficiency and lack of sleep and over cardio. And then that brittle hair starts falling out, and they get tired, and they usually end up with the female triad, which is anemia from an iron deficiency, amenorrhea, which is the cessation of the menstrual period, and a low calcium. We see runners suffering from stress fractures and from running. It's all from these depleting diets that have been prescribed in the fitness industry. I've been dealing with this for well over 30 years. I've been training women for competition since the late 80s at a very high level, at state, national, and professional level in the IFBB and the NPC since the late 80s. Worked with some big names, even way back then. And at least it was isolated to that little industry. Now what's happening with all the social media and the explosion of the popularity of this now figure, physique, bikini, wellness, is that dad bods and soccer moms, particularly soccer moms, see these women in the best shape of their life on stage and copy their diets. So now the mainstream has started to do egg whites and tilapia and broccoli, and suffering all the side effects without any of the pharmacopoeia that the women in the fitness industry are using, usually Anavar to prevent muscle loss, thyroid medication to prevent the obvious thyroid deficiency, the hypothyroidism, clenbuterol to compensate for their metabolism slowing. These women have a drug protocol that allows them to make it to that day on the stage. The soccer moms don't. They're somewhat unaware of that, or at least to the extent that they should be. So now they're suffering all the side effects. They've lost more muscle, their hair's falling out, thyroid's ground to a halt. And they end up at the doctor's office getting shots for iron, D3, glutathione, you name it, and all too often for antidepressants, which is just painfully it's a shame to watch. And so I've been real outspoken about that since the day I've released the vertical diet, that about all of those things, those shortcomings, and why I think that people should include a lot of the foods that I've been recommending throughout this conversation.
Stan, you touched on some of the protocols that some of the professional athletes are using in the women's space fitness, and the drugs you mentioned there are fairly, I wouldn't say safe, but in correct dosage they can be effective. Are you seeing any women that are potentially talking to husbands, partners, and so forth, who are recommending more evasive or more a lot stronger protocols? Are you seeing women come through that you're potentially working with as well, having to rectify?
Yes, it's individualistic, the side effects. And the challenge with the performance enhancing drugs, especially with women, is that it might start small, but it grows over time. And they just keep taking more and more, thinking it's going to get them to the next level. I want to be a national competitor. I want to be a professional. And then, then the gloves are off. And I understand it. I lived in that industry for 30 years. I get it. And you'll do almost anything at all costs. We, interviewed Olympic athletes who have said if they took a pill that would get them a gold medal, but they die in 5 years, most of them would take it.
Familiar with that one. Yeah.
So I can't cast any dispersions on competitive athletes, men and women, for making the decisions that they make for performance enhancement. But these soccer moms, the general population, the much larger group of people out there, is generally unaware that that's what they're doing to compensate for those over restrictive nutrition programs. That's what allows them to do 2 hours of cardio a day, their 4 a.m. fasted cardio. Because if you tried that natural, then as mentioned, you'd lose all your muscle and your thyroid you'd have to get hypothyroidism and your hair would fall out and you'd get depressed and your libido would actually crush and you'd get anemia and you'd get amenorrhea and all those things. So I don't know if that specifically addresses the question, but I just wanted to separate the two. Obviously, women who are competing can and do, or have and do, utilize, and I mentioned some of the, like you said, the lower side effect drugs, but that's not to say that there's no side effects. You take thyroid, you can shut your own thyroid down and you can be on it for the rest of your life. You take Anavar, some women will hyper respond and they'll end up with, clitoral enlargement, and they'll end up with facial hair, they'll end up with hair loss, all of those things, and deepening of the voice. That can happen on Anavar. It's not as common. It certainly happens at a very high rate when they jump into Winstrol. And we see that very, very common with the voice changes and all of that, the viralizing effects. So there are recommendations that we make for people, that want to do that, but want to do it as safely as possible. But that's a real gray area to be in, because you hesitate to advise someone because you know that there's risks. But in the absence of your advice, who else is advising them? And are they taking something that the much higher risk?
They're going to do it anyway. Yeah, they're going to do it anyway. So you better to point them in the right direction, or.
I agree. They're going to do it anyway. So you got to be really cautious. And then there's, a whole nother can of worms as to whether or not what they're getting is real.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? Like Anavar is very, very pricey. It's often faked with Winstrol, and girls are taking it thinking that that's what they're getting.
But
it happens.
Just in terms of that information out there as well, I mean, you've got people like Dr. Tony Huge and formerly Boston Lloyd, although he's gone the other way. Very prominent figures in the social media scene who are not exposing, but very publicly talking about their cycles, which for those two especially, astronomically huge. And so it is still a taboo subject. Maybe 10, 15 years ago it wasn't talked about whatsoever. But now you've got the likes of like Doreen Yates and Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler, not openly, but they are admittedly talking about what they did in the past. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, that didn't happen. So now that the general public are aware that these sort of substances are out there and available, and potentially making poor choices based on, the likes of Dr. Tony Huge and Boston Lloyd and so forth.
And that's in every industry. I mean, there's good information, there's bad information out there. I mean, that's true with, you name it. You go into the nutrition world and you've got vegans versus carnivores, and you got people making recommendations about a whole sort of things, whether it's supplements, whether it's, different foods, even cholesterol, how to manage it, what the actual risks are, not the relative risks, but actual risks are. There's such a wide variety of information. With respect to performance enhancing drugs, it has been historically difficult to talk about because it compromises, I think, an athlete that wants to discuss that kind of gets pigeonholed as being only that. And it can be difficult for them to maintain, I think, some respect in the industry if that's the things they start to talk about. I remember Dorian talking about it. I remember I was there in the late 80s when people started transitioning, and in the early 90s from 1 cc a week to 2 to 3 to, I watched it happen throughout my life. I participated in some of that. But more than most, I mentioned I was getting blood tests on almost a monthly basis, starting when I was 20 years old. I was identified as hypogonadal. I had varicocele, which is it's a vein that doesn't drain from the testicles, and so it can cause impotence and cause low testosterone. So I ventured into that whole realm as a result of a medical condition. I had talked about the fact that I was undersized. I was 135 pounds as an 18-year-old in college.
Wow.
And a lot of that, I think, stemmed from the fact that I had a very terrible diet. I had delayed onset puberty in high school because I was working at 7-Eleven and just eating shit every day. I was eating hot dogs and, those nacho chips with the pumped cheese and drinking soda pop. And then I would work the swing shift. I'd go to school during the day, and then I would come there, work at night till almost midnight, and I'd get home till 1 a.m, and then, back up again. I'd watch TV for an hour, and then I'd be back up again 4 or 5 hours later. And so I never really had the opportunity. My body never had the sleep or the nutrition that it needed to go through puberty. Your body listens to those signals, and it knows whether or not it has what it needs to make that process happen. And so as a senior in high school, I went back to my uncle's farm in Pennsylvania and started drinking, whole milk straight from the cows there in the glass bottles with the cream on top that you had to shake.
Beautiful.
Nice.
It was incredible. And when he raised animals and we had pigs, we ate cattle and bacon every morning with lard. And so I wrestled 98 pounds as a freshman and sophomore, 106 as a junior. I was a tiny kid. And after going to my uncle's, I beefed up to 135 or almost 140 in just like 6 months. I finally went through puberty when I started sleeping more and feeding myself these, enough calories, enough protein, and enough good quality food.
Was there anyone that hadn't seen you in 6 months that saw you after the 6 months and didn't recognize you?
Yeah, because I had moved from Oregon to Pennsylvania for that 6 to 8 months to be with my uncle and my grandfather on their farm. And so when I came back, I was noticeably, taller too. I got grown taller and I'd gotten bigger. I mean, not huge, 140 pounds. My dad played tennis in college at 150, and that's about what he weighed when he went into the military after college, when he joined the Air Force. And you look at World War II veterans or World War II recruits, they have pretty detailed statistics on them. And the average weight was in the low 140s for an 18-year-old male. So I know that's changed over time since that time as our calories have increased and our genetics, larger parents having larger kids. Obviously, there's a whole spectrum. But the average military recruit, 17, 18-year-old military recruit, when my pops went in back in 1940, 1950 is when he went in, was about 140 pounds. And so, when I got to college at 18, that was a small kid. And I was playing, I got a college scholarship to play soccer, and I was undersized. And my coach told me I needed to hit the weight room and bulk up because I was too little. I wasn't necessarily weak because I wrestled, and I was reasonably strong for my weight, but I was too light and I was kind of getting shoved around out there. So I went and lifted weights that summer, and I never came back. I told him I quit. This is what I want to do. I was reading magazines with the IFBB pros on the cover, Muscle and Fitness, and here's this 140-pound kid wanted to be a pro bodybuilder, which at the time was ridiculous because all you had was the open classes. They didn't have men's figure or mankini. That didn't exist. So at my height, at 6 foot, I needed to be over 240 on stage, and I weighed 140 at the time. So it was a long process. After 2 years of training, I competed at 158. That was my first show. And it just took me years and years and years. It was almost 10 years, about 8 years before I competed in a powerlifting. It took me that long to get big enough and strong enough to where I felt like I could, compete in powerlifting. And so it's been a long journey, but it's been one that, I was just so I love it. And I'm cautious when I make recommendations to other people about training that they don't have the same passion and enjoyment that I do. And so I have to be really careful in terms of compliance to make sure that I always say the best diet's the one you'll follow and the best exercise is the one you'll do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I've got to ask, you know, hey, what do you love to do? What will you do consistently? And it might not just be one thing. It might be different things over the course of many months or years. But that's kind of a deep dive into my history and kind of my mindset on why I am where I am now.
So how did you structure your competitions? I've done a little bit of both as well. So, but I think the heaviest schedule I did 3 powerlifting events and 4 bodybuilding shows in a 15-month period, I think it was. So, and it wasn't like back-to-back powerlifting. Like sometimes I would gain 5 kilos and then I'd drop 5 kilos out, and that's how I kind of managed it. You know, how busy has that schedule been once you decided that you were interested in powerlifting, and then what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think that they lend themselves well to each other, because when I was competing in just bodybuilding and competing frequently, I wouldn't put on very much. I wouldn't retain very much muscle, because you would build it up and then you diet it off right away. And when you're dieting it off with the restricted diets that we used to use and a lot of cardio, it seemed like every ounce of muscle you gained would just disappear for your next show. And the neat thing about powerlifting is that at least you would gain the weight. It would take you a little longer. You would compete in something else. I was cautious about how frequently I would diet back down, I guess I should say, because I learned that lesson already. That if you don't gain a weight and hold on to it for a while, we talk a lot about our set points, our homeostatic, set points that our body wants to maintain. When you gain some weight, you have to hold on to that weight for a while. This is what we're going through with John. We got him up over north of 250, and he was looking to maybe fight in October or November. He'd have gone back down to 235 as soon as he jumped into camp and started doing martial arts 2 hours a day, morning and night. So I said, you don't own that. Some Flex said to me back in 2008 when I started working with Flex Wheeler. He's like, you don't own that. And when you gain a bunch of weight, certainly you're going to gain some fat with the muscle, and it behooves you to stay there as long as possible, and maybe even try and do a body composition change there at that new weight, so that when you do miss a meal or miss a workout, you don't lose 3 pounds immediately, which was always my case. I was kind of a leaner kid, so I would lose weight. Other people might get over fat because they have too large of a calorie surplus and they have maybe a slower metabolism than I, and they try and gain too much weight too quickly. I work with people on both ends of the spectrum. So I think they lend themselves well to each other. Another great thing that bodybuilding and powerlifting, competing in both, did for me when I was alternating one and then the other is when you bodybuild, you have no weaknesses. You work every body part from damn near every angle, with a large variety of exercises. And so one of the biggest problems we have with people who just powerlift is we quickly discover huge weaknesses, usually posterior chain, those kinds of things. I think this is what Louis Simmons focused on, although I didn't really meet and know Louis until after I was done competing in my late 40s. I just met him a few years ago, as a matter of fact. But that's one of the things that they always focused on was weaknesses. Also, they focused on building a big GPP, general physical preparedness, on cardio. And it's not the traditional kind of cardio that you would think about from doing the treadmill, but the kind of cardio involved in doing lots of volume. And maybe even twice a day, sled drags and lots of repetitions. And that's what bodybuilding did for me. And it's purely by accident. I didn't say I invented this process, but just by competing in bodybuilding and powerlifting, I essentially did the same thing that Eddie Cohn and Westside Barbell did throughout their careers, was to build a lot of muscle, to have no weaknesses, to have a huge cardiovascular base from all the volume and frequency and the shorter rest periods that would come with bodybuilding. And that carried over very well into powerlifting. I also built some very strong tendons from just the sheer volume of work I did for many, many, many years. And so I thought that bodybuilding really helped powerlifting. powerlifting didn't help bodybuilding very much, except for the fact that it made me maintain my weight for a longer period of time. But doing heavy singles doesn't do anything for a bodybuilder. So that was not, that was a matter of fact. I've told this story many times. When I trained with Flex Wheeler back in 2009 and earned my pro card, it was the biggest and fullest I had ever been, including my legs, which I've always struggled with. I'm a skinny kid. I had tiny little legs. And I got them up to 30 inches. That was the biggest they ever got. A lot of that is adductor and inner thigh, and not necessarily lateral sweep, and certainly never had a whole lot of mass around the knee. I just have high insertions for my medialis and lateralis in particular. So I competed and I won my pro card. I was in the low 250s, probably 252 pounds on stage when I won my pro card with Flex Wheeler. And immediately after that, I was in San Jose, California, training with Flex for about 3 months. I lived in an extended stay and I trained with him twice a day, every day for nearly 3 months. And then I packed my bags and I went 2 hours over to Sacramento and trained with Mark Bell at his little tiny 800 square foot powerlifting cubby hole that was off the side of a CrossFit box at the time. And again, I stayed in an extended stay hotel and I trained with him every day. Within 7 weeks of competing at 252, shredded, I had to be under 5% body fat when I won that show. It was the best condition I've ever been in, and the fullest and biggest, because Flex actually wouldn't let me squat, bench, or deadlift throughout the entire training session.
Oh, wow.
He thought they weren't good for bodybuilding. I was a hip squatter, so it wasn't doing anything for my quads. It had a lot of built up a lot of fatigue, systemic fatigue, central nervous system overload.
Especially
and he wanted me to train. Yeah, and he wanted me to train twice a day with more volume and frequency. We were doing sets of 20 with 90-second rest periods, just go, 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 go. And so he had a ton of volume. And if I started deadlifting or squatting, particularly heavy, I'd have crushed my central nervous system. I'd have built up so much fatigue, I never would have recovered from those workouts. So transition to Mark Bell, the next thing you know, I'm not doing all of that volume, and I'm slowly and gradually starting to build up my strength. So each week we would just add weight, pretty much just on a linear progression for 7 straight weeks. I gained 35 pounds. I went from 250-ish to 285.
Wow.
Because I was competing at 275, and so I only had to drop, about 10 pounds of water. I went from 250 to 285 in 7 weeks, and my legs went from 30 inches to 28 and a half. And I was squatting 800 pounds nearly every week for the last 4 weeks.
Wow.
So I lost size doing singles. I wasn't doing the kind of volume that I had been doing, and my muscles responded accordingly, and I got smaller in the legs. I got a lot bigger in the midsection, in the core, and the ass and belly, but smaller in the periphery. My arms and legs actually got smaller.
Has that been a challenge, Stan, going from bodybuilding to powerlifting with your waist increasing in size with powerlifting and then having to reduce it for bodybuilding?
Yeah, that would probably be the number one thing I caution people against when they gain weight. It's not to gain too much, because the waist will suffer. I think even Mike Israetel talked about this as one of the biggest regrets he had with packing on so much weight at one time. And it resulted in loose skin in his lower abdomen. And it's just a mistake that he made. And I've seen it happen, to many, many, many bodybuilders over the years. They try and get up over 300 pounds. That was always the number. I was a little north of 6 foot. And so when I got to 300 pounds, fortunately, I didn't have a lot of excess. I wasn't that fat. I got
but fat.
that fat. And I always caution people, they would see, like Mark Bell would talk about the fact that you could still see my abs at north of 290. But that's just because I don't carry a lot of subcutaneous fat. I don't carry it in my belly. I would gain a lot of fat like some people do in viscerally, which is very bad for health, to gain a lot of stomach fat around, your organs, around your liver and all of that. So that was kind of an Eddie Hall's experience when he got up to 400 pounds. You could still see some abs over the front of his belly, but it would stick way out, and all the fat was inside, and he suffered from some health problems. I saw it in my blood tests. I saw a little of the results from fatty liver, elevated triglycerides, obviously blood pressure elevation. You see those kinds of things. I see it in a lot of my big athletes' blood tests as well. elevated AST and ALT liver enzymes, creatinine climbing. And so I'm always cautious to have them periodize their weight. I try and make them, you can't lift heavy year round, but you shouldn't stay heavy either. You should diet down. And if you take off about 7% of your body weight, which is what we did with Hofthor when I met him, he was 440. We brought him down to about the high 390s. Yeah, it's amazing. We brought him down to the high 390s, and we completely changed his blood markers. He dramatically improved his blood sugars and his blood pressure. His liver enzymes normalized. And of course, then we took him back up a little smarter. We implemented some strategies so that he wouldn't gain as much body fat. You know, we went up a little slower, improved his sleep, got some vitamin D3, added more choline to his diet, which helps prevent either reverse or prevent fatty liver. Not entirely. Obviously, you know, I talked about this in my rants about health and fitness. They're not being the same thing. You know, fitness being the ability to perform a particular duty or task, and you know, the ability to become you know, world's strongest man or even a UFC fighter. It's not necessarily healthy. And so a lot of what I did was mitigate damage with these guys and just try and do it with as little adverse effects as possible. But at some point, you know, you realize that you're kind of pushing the line in terms of health and performance. So, but even just a 7% body weight loss will resolve 95% of fatty liver as studied with biopsies. So, wow. And up to 15% body weight loss can completely, well, not for everyone, but for the vast majority of people, can restore beta cell function in the pancreas, even if you have suffered from type 2 diabetes and some sort of beta cell down regulation, so you can normalize your blood sugars, your insulin again. So there's hope. You know, we do a lot of this with big athletes, big football players, strongmen, powerlifters, a lot of blood pressure, have the high blood pressure quick fix kit and the high blood sugar quick fix kit. And we implement all these strategies. It's never any one thing. It's very comprehensive. There's usually 6 or 7 or 8 things that you go hard on concurrently, and it makes dramatic changes in people's general health.
I suppose it's one of those things that, like, especially in strongman and powerlifting and probably bodybuilding, people just, it's ignorance is bliss. They don't want to know. You know what I mean? They just.
You hit the nail right on the head. People won't get blood tests. They won't. They'll ignore their blood pressure. Yeah. And at their demise, because high blood pressure kills. It'll take your kidneys out. I mean, quick. And
you don't get much of a warning, do you, with kidney failure?
Nah.
No, not at all. And that's why, you know, you can even, there's some more affordable blood tests out there that I think people should get pretty regularly, like every 2 months, if they're going to be doing that kind of thing. I got them on a monthly basis for 12 or 13 years. Yeah. I can go back and look at my records from 2009. I can see my blood tests on a monthly basis. I watched what happened as my body weight increased. And so that helped me change certain aspects of how fast I gained weight, what kind of foods I ate, my exercise protocol, getting a CPAP, you know, because I watched my blood pressure. All of those things had a dramatic influence on the changes that I made in my personal program and what I do for my athletes.
It's all just data collection, isn't it? Really, I mean, and then knowing what to do with it, as such.
100%. Yeah, that which gets measured gets improved. And so, get your blood pressure tested. Get maybe an Oura ring to look at your sleep. But usually, if you're snoring and waking up tired, you just know. If you're north of 240 pounds, you know, and you're squatting and you got a thick neck, you probably need a CPAP. And then the blood test can tell you a ton of things that. And some simple changes can be made. When I worked with Rob Kearney, World's Strongest Gay, when he was trying to set the American record in the overhead log press, he reached out to me about, I think it was 2 months before the overhead log press, and he was disappointed because he had just missed a 400-pound log press in training. He was trying to do a 470, I think, for the American record, and now he had overhead pressed north of 450, 460 before. So it's not like, you know, we made this miraculous change, but he was overtrained, and a lot of it was under recovery. He said that he wanted to lose some weight. He felt heavy and unhealthy and bloated and high blood pressure and those kinds of things. And, so he calls me up and says, I want to lose weight and I want to set the American record in the log press. And as a coach, I'm like,
and
those two things don't go together.
Mm.
Yeah, 2 months out. Give me a 6-pack and a 470 overhead press in the log. I'm like, I'm not a magician, but I didn't tell him that. I just, as a coach, I knew that mass moves mass. And the last thing you want to do is take weight off of a strength athlete right before a competition. Dumb.
Yeah.
But he had some concerns that I thought I could rectify in the absence of weight loss. Normally, weight loss would be my initial solution for a lot of those things, blood pressure and all those things. He said he was experiencing some bloating. And a lot of that is diet related, but some of that's also sodium, potassium. Most athletes don't get adequate potassium. Potassium helps regulate water balance in the body and can really remedy bloating. We see it in pregnant women who get their cankles. They get the edema, the water retention in their ankles. A lot of that can be a result of a sodium potassium imbalance. And so I just threw some more potassium in his diet: potatoes, oranges, yogurt. Just tried to bring that up to north of 4,000, almost 5,000 milligrams of potassium a day from food. And then he said he was, the bloating was primarily because he was eating a lot of foods that were causing him to bloat. And powerlifters eat pizzas and sandwiches, and they just eat anything and everything. And so I put him on, what is kind of known as the vertical diet. I just put him on leaner. I put him on more of a high FODMAP menu with things like white rice and fruit, things that were easy to digest. So almost immediately his bloating improved, his water retention improved, that improved his sleep. We actually put about, I think, 5 pounds on him. I increased his calories and put about 5 pounds on him, and the rest is history. He set the record, the American record, in the overhead log press, and felt pretty damn good. He said that his waist felt smaller and his shoulders felt broader, and that was exactly the experience I had with Brian Shaw 2 years prior when I worked with him. He ended up started taking his shirt off and doing selfies with his shirt off for the first time in years.
Yep.
Because his waist got smaller and his shoulders got bigger. And that was just a juxtaposition of mostly the types of foods that he ate, which caused less food bulk in the large intestine. And then the balance of water. That was primarily how he benefited. And we changed the foods so they were easier to consume. I mentioned those guys eat a lot of pizza and pasta and pancakes, and those things just bloat the hell out of you. And so, I went to the Monster Mash. I just mixed up a little bit of ground beef, white rice, and bone broth, and some scrambled eggs, and he was able to just pound that. And if we added some extra rice, we would put a little dextrose on there, which makes it easy to consume.
Yeah.
You get more amylase, and it digests faster. And so he's hungry again sooner. And that was one of the biggest things Brian said to me a week into the diet. He said, Stan, I'm hungry. He said, I haven't been hungry in years. And I thought that was awesome, because that's the hardest thing. If you have to eat 10,000 calories a day to support over 400 pounds of body mass, the hardest thing is eating that 10,000 calories. It becomes a full-time job. People who've never done it don't appreciate how hard it is to maintain a calorie surplus for an athlete of that size.
Yeah. I couldn't even fathom 10,000 calories. Even 5,000 calories is a lot of meal.
I remember hearing you say about the dextrose one time, because I was really struggling with putting on weight, but I liked honey, so I put honey on my rice.
100%.
When I was in, and it's a massive difference, man. You can get through cups and cups of rice so easily.
Yeah,
when it's sweet. Yeah, man, it's so good.
Well, you get more saliva.
Yeah.
You get more amylase, which is the digestive enzyme for carbohydrates.
Yeah.
There's some evidence that your pancreas increases its amylase production,
right,
which helps break down the starch components. So you get less bloating in your small intestine from the starch, the large volume of starch, because now you have more amylase breaking it down. But just mechanically speaking, like you just said, you can eat more of it faster and then get hungry again sooner.
Yeah.
And you don't use the honey to drive calories. You just use it to facilitate the intake of more rice.
And it ends up being more calories anyway.
Yeah, because you're eating more food.
Yeah, you're getting more carbs.
I do the same thing. People talk about the orange juice, and I have to remind them. Sometimes they're like, oh, the orange juice is bothering my stomach, because I only drink 3 ounces. Yeah. And it's just because fructose is digested directly to the liver. And if you stimulate the liver with some sugars, then it helps your appetite.
Yeah.
The opposite of that would be take some D-ball and give your liver some toxins, and it'll shut your appetite down.
Yeah.
I actually, and I tell that story because that's how I discovered it. And I'm not saying I invented it. That's how I first realized it. I'm sure, there's information out there that I could have read, but I didn't. But anytime I would take D-ball before a powerlifting meet, my appetite would go to shit. I couldn't eat a thing. I was just completely at no appetite. And that's because my liver was like, hey, toxins, shut down appetite, quit putting poison into my mouth, into your mouth. And I discovered that, and I don't specifically remember the moment or what, research I came across or article, but I started taking in more fruit juice, Historically, I hadn't really drank fruit juice. Fruit juice is bad for you, right? I mean, that's what you listen to all the gurus tell you, or all the nutritionists. And almost immediately restored my appetite. And I also noticed that my AST and ALT in particular enzymes went down. When I would lose appetite from taking D-ball, I could see it in my liver enzymes. I could see the liver enzymes start to rise. It was never extraordinary. One time I took Superdrol and my liver enzymes went like 4 times normal. They were and I'll never do that again. I felt sick as a dog. It was just miserable. There's lessons that you learn. And if I hadn't done the blood testing, I probably never would have been as in tune with that. But for the experience, because there's a whole cornucopia of things that you throw at yourself, getting ready for bodybuilding and powerlifting meets.
Absolutely.
It's always the kitchen sink. And so it's hard to tell which specific item was causing the problem. But that one was pretty obvious. It showed up in my blood test, and it manifested as a loss of appetite, and just lethargy was through the roof. I was tired all the time. But again, just to backtrack, the OJ seemed to work. So I recommended that a few times to a few close powerlifting friends, and boom, one after the other. They're like, oh my God, got my appetite back. And it was a kind of a neat little find. And that's not necessarily the only reason I recommend orange juice in my diet for weight gainers, but it does help with appetite. Just a few ounces kind of make you a little hungrier 2 hours later is what I found. And now I use it. I like to take in a decent amount of calcium. We know that calcium is good for bones, but we also know it's good for nerve signaling and muscle contraction. Those people who study exercise physiology notice that calcium is what triggers muscle contraction and relaxation, the tropomyosin receptor, and then the activation of the muscle fibers. And so I like to get a lot of calcium into my clients' diets, especially athletes, and not supplemental form. It seems that supplemental form doesn't have the protective benefits of cardiovascular disease, so and might actually be adverse. And so I want them to and not all of them can take in dairy, certainly not in a significant amount, like milk, because it's higher in lactose. A good Greek yogurt is much lower in lactose. It's been fermented, and so a lot of that's pre-digested, and so it's easier to consume. And so I started making these yogurt OJ shakes. I would, sorry, got you back there?
Yeah.
Good to go.
So I started making these yogurt OJ shakes, and I would just use like 3 or 4 ounces of orange juice, and then about a cup of yogurt, and then add some ice water to it. And sometimes I'd blend it. It's delicious. It tastes like an orange creamsicle. And it's really just a vehicle to get, 300 or 400 milligrams of calcium into me from yogurt. Just bam, because sitting there and trying to spoon yogurt in, especially
Yeah.
Greek yogurt, it isn't, terribly good.
It's an acquired taste, Greek yogurt. Yeah, I think if you can get past that first spoonful, the second spoonful is gold. As long as you've got the right Greek yogurt. I have Greek yogurt every day of my morning shake with blueberries and protein powder and all sorts of things.
There you go.
It's my breakfast every single day.
And you got to search around for different Greek yogurts because they're different tastes and textures. Some are really dry, and so all these little things are little tips and tricks that I've kind of learned over the years. I share them with people, and if it works out for them, they're just ecstatic about it. So that's the latest fun one.
Now, Stan, speaking of heavyweights losing weight, you've got Hathor and Eddie about to go toe to toe. Who have you got your money on?
Boy, I don't know. Hathor is so disciplined. I think Eddie's more of a natural fighter. It's my understanding he kind of grew up in that environment. But Hathor I've never met anybody that, he would do if you told him to eat a brick, he'd eat a brick. If he believed in what you were telling him. He is unbelievably disciplined, organized. Every single meal. He would tell stories about when he was on set on HBO's Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, yeah.
When his timer would go off for his meal, he would stop in the middle of shooting. He would literally stop, hold on, walk over, get his thermos, and eat his meal to get his calories in.
Wow.
And it'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, at the World's Strongest Man down in Florida, he finished an event, and the camera crew and microphone guy came over to interview him, and he did the same thing. I was standing off to the side, and I saw him. He went like this, put his hand up, and his wife was right there, and she handed him his container, and he drank. I don't know if it was his post-workout hydration drink. I put together that dextrose, orange juice, sodium drink for him after most of his training sessions. But he just stopped. He said, wait. And they're all just standing there waiting until he finished his drink. So where were we headed with that? Did I get distracted somewhere?
That was Hathor versus Eddie Hall.
Okay.
You've got Eddie the scrapper, and you've got Hathor.
I've just been watching him train. I haven't been working with Hathor closely. I worked with Hathor for damn near 4 years, and he knows everything that I know by now. He's learned everything and then some. And so I'm not in touch with him very much. I'm off doing different things, working with different athletes. But I watch him, and I see the amount of effort that he's put into it. The coaches he's brought into his camp, a variety of different coaches, not just boxers, but martial artists, that can help him with just with an awareness in the ring. I've watched his training protocols, his conditioning. So I think he might be the more skilled of the two, where Eddie might have the raw talent that Hathor may have acquired more skills. And we'll just see if his strategy at the end of the day will ward off the haymakers that Eddie's going to be throwing some haymakers. And Eddie's a hell of an athlete, a very strong guy. So I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of one of those haymakers myself. But if Hathor can use his range and stay and his conditioning is such that he can outlast the initial barrages, then I think he might be able to get the best of that matchup.
Should be good to watch. Yeah, we're going to see you in the ring anytime soon, Stan.
You got to jump on the train. Yeah.
My old age. No, I stay in my lane. I know what I'm capable of, and especially now that I'm down there in that camp and I'm at Jackson Wink and I'm seeing, Brandon Gibson and Greg Jackson, Mike Winklejohn and a lot of the other athletes that John trains with. There's some amazing athletes, and their skill level, because they're trained in wrestling and jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and striking. It's just, even if like the little guys, even the 150-pound guys. Brandon Gibson's not a very big guy. Greg Jackson's not a very big guy. but they will whoop your ass in like 3 seconds flat.
Yeah.
You know, so
no doubt about it.
It's humbling to watch.
I reckon we could get a Stan Efferding, Mark Bell matchup showdown.
Oh yeah, Mark Bell. Yeah.
I think I could take Mark. I'll take that.
All right, here we go. You heard it here first. Mark Bell with the call out.
There's our line to get Mark in. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna want the really big gloves and the really big helmets, and we'll do this number here back.
I think Mark's he's got a big noggin, so he's gonna need a big helmet anyway.
Yeah, indeed.
Stan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Where can people find you? Although that's probably a stupid question, but
thank you. Everything's at Stan Efferding. My website is stanefferding.com. I have a link on there for blood tests, by the way. It's for anybody who wants to get one. It might not work in New Zealand, but in the US at least, I do online blood tests so I can get all my information. That'll get you to my meal prep company. That'll get you to my ebooks. And then at Stan Efferding is my Instagram. I make a lot of posts there. And I'm really thinking about starting back up my rants on YouTube. Is also Stan Efferding.
Do it.
I kind of ran out of really usable information, and I didn't want to start throwing out garbage for clicks. So, but there's a lot of great rants that I think are just as relevant today as they were through those many years that I made them. Is Stan Efferding. So it's all under my name. You can find it anywhere. There's a lot of free content out there. Everything we discussed today is in the rants or in my Iceland seminar with Hafthor, which is a 2-hour deep dive into the vertical diet. So I don't have to always steer people to my website to buy my ebook, but I've talked about damn near everything that is in my ebook at one time or another. You just got to kind of search around for it.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Stan. So we'll be keeping a close eye on things, and hopefully we'll get you back on in the future at some stage as well.
Thanks, guys. Did anybody hear? Was anybody cheating and looking at their iPhone to see who won the Conor McGregor fight?
I don't even know if it's on. I'm specked up the road at the moment. I've been watching. No one said anything.
I think it's on right now, or it may just be over. So when we hang up, we'll all know.
We'll go and check it out. Yeah,
it'll be a
good fight.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks,
guys. Great conversation.
Thanks,
if I ever make it to New Zealand, I'm going to come see you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we'll host you. Brilliant. All right. Catch you later.